Good morning, traders, and welcome to the weekend update here for Sunday, November 30th. I hope all of you here in the United States had a great Thanksgiving Day and Thanksgiving weekend. So anything we get from our markets this last week is going to be a little bit skewed. What I mean by that is many times the professional trade desks in New York are shut down for part or most of the week. So a lot of the activity that happens during that week is more retail traders. Retail traders often tend to be a little more bullish than the institutional traders in New York. So if that's the case, and we have lots of retail traders buying into the market because they have FOMO, fear of missing out, and there are not institutional traders there to take the other side of that trade and sell into that bullishness, you can get massive runs like what we had here, essentially a 300-point run over the course of the week. Now, that does not mean that I am not bullish on this market. It just means that I'm taking what I'm seeing with a little bit of a grain of salt until we get the professionals back involved and we see what happens with our markets. A couple things that are of note is that I had drawn this support line here for SPX, and we did bounce off of that almost exactly to the point of right down here around that 65.30 range. Now, when we bounced on higher volume there for a couple of days as well. And then, of course, volume dropped off considerably, but that's to be expected. Holiday week. Lots of, again, retail traders, not institutions, which drive the real volume in our markets. So we were going to see lighter volume. That always happens on these holiday weeks. We'll see the same thing around Christmas as well. Now, we did have a downtrend line that I had drawn in there that we broke above on Friday. Will that hold? I don't know. We're coming back to all-time highs. My expectation here on SPX going into next week is that we might get a little bit of a sideways move or backing and filling a little bit before resuming higher. But I do think we're going to resume higher between now and the end of the year. There's often a phenomena or a market situation called the Santa Claus rally that as we go into the end of the year, people tend to start buying more. It's fairly common, happens quite often, and I suspect that's probably going to play out again here this year. That's what we look like on SPX. Of course, SPY is going to look almost exactly the same. So no real secrets there. It is a slightly more in line there. Yeah, it broke out as well. So again, almost the exact same thing we're seeing on SPY. The S&P futures, pretty much the same picture there. Also, same thing with volume. We've got that higher volume on late last week. And then, of course, volume dropped off significantly this week because of the holidays. We're going to look at volatility, and we're going to see that volatility is really low here. There is not fear in our markets right now, and that is usually the scenario as we are moving higher. Now we'll take a look at the Qs. Qs, very similar story to the S&P. Again, zoom in on this just a little bit, and we'll see that the Qs also came down to a support level that I had put in here, and then bounced off of that. And Qs are just trying to break above that downtrend line. Again, we'll see how that plays out this next week. My expectation is maybe a little bit of a pullback, chop sideways, and then ultimately a resumption to higher levels. By higher levels, I mean pushing up here on all-time highs. We'll have to see what the market looks like at the time we get there as to whether or not I expect a breakout to all new highs. But I certainly think we could be pushing back on these prior highs in SPY in Q in that 638 or so range. And same thing on SPY, S&P futures, etc. We look at VIX, or the volatility in the Qs, also very low. No surprise there. IWM. So IWM showing some significant strength as well, but also on much lower volume this week. And the volatility for IWM, also back to all-time lows. No real fear in the market on IWM. Take a look at gold. And as I had anticipated, or as I had mentioned previously, I was expecting some consolidation in gold and then likely a resumption to the upside. That hasn't quite happened yet. Gold has not broken out, but I would be watching for that to break out again. If it breaks out, we're certainly going to push on these prior highs up here around, I believe that's 405, somewhere in that general range, and potentially break to all new highs from there in gold as well. So overall, I think the markets are definitely back into a bullish mode at this point. The Santa Claus rally is also playing into things. We do have some sizable earnings announcements this week. I think we have Salesforce, symbol CRM, coming up this week. I think we have Crowdsource, CRWD. There's a couple other tech plays that also have earnings this week. So they're not quite the size of an NVIDIA or an Apple, but they're pretty big players. And then there's an economic announcement late this week. I believe farm payrolls are happening on Friday. Usually not a huge market mover, but those are some of the things that are going to be coming up this week that I'll need to watch, keep an eye on. So with that, everyone, that wraps up the weekend update and market report. And I'll look forward to seeing everyone here next weekend. Take care.